Batteries are actually getting to the point where they can be seen as a grid asset. I go back about 10 years and I remember a number of utilities looking at me and say, batteries are a nice toy, but they're not a grid asset. I think they've actually come to the point where they are a reliable enough asset that the grid operators are looking at them and saying, I'm actually buying this like I'm buying substations and turbines and everything else that's in place.
Wildfires, heat waves, surging demand from AI data centers, they're all testing the grid in ways that we have never seen before. Energy storage is not just about capacity anymore. And it's certainly not about backup only. It's about keeping the system stable when it matters most. The question is, how fast can U.S. market evolve to capture the new value streams that solar now has the capacity to provide? Joining me are two leaders from Wärtsilä Energy Storage. First, Tamara de Gruyter. Did I get the last part? Perfect. All right. Who stepped into the role of president of energy storage earlier this year. She brings a truly global perspective at a time when I would say that our U.S. market is facing both growing pains and enormous opportunity and can use some global perspective. Alongside her, my longtime friend, Dave Hebert, the Vice President of Global Sales and Business Strategy, who works closely with customers to turn complex policy and structures in the market into real projects and revenue. Welcome to the stage.
Thanks. Appreciate it. Good to be here.
Good to see you and have you back. Tamara, you've come into the role relatively recently and at a pivotal moment in the U.S. market. So I'd love to get maybe a kind of a hot take from you on the current market situation as a relative newcomer, your perspective. I'm going to call you an outsider, although you're very squarely inside. What's your take on the market right now?
It has been a very interesting 5 months. And as you said, when I came into the market, my second working day, we actually were faced with the tariff situation. So I think this is actually a bit of a challenge we now face in the US market. At the same time, you could also say there's still a lot of customers that want to continue. So overall, maybe some early headwinds, but then for the more medium terms, there's definitely a way to continue. What is also very interesting learning about this market is that I can really see the market is maturing. There's more renewables coming into the grids. There's more requirement for grid stability. So it's not only to provide backup power. I think you now see a kind of pivotal point where battery storage will need to provide more services, as you already alluded to. Because this is just part of the market maturing. I think also customers are looking for more sophistication. They are looking for different revenue models. And I think one other very exciting opportunity is definitely data centers. I think AI is a hot topic. Everyone is building data centers, and data centers have different requirements, and batteries are definitely part of that equation. So a very dynamic market, very much developing, maturing, learning together, us and the customers, the technology providers. And there's a lot of opportunity for the future, although the headwinds give us some headache on the short term.
You mentioned the word sophistication, and I feel like sometimes that word needs to be unpacked. So I'm going to invite you to maybe explain what you mean by what does sophistication look like with regards to the storage market right now?
I would say one element of sophistication is also, instead of only charging the batteries, there's also an element of grid stability.
Right.
And there the batteries can help. And when you talk about sophistication, for me, it's very much more than only the hardware. It's the software that really helps you.
Yeah.
So I think that is a super important element, how to help our customers unlock value by using the software as well.
Dave, I know that you guys are working around the world, and I suspect that you've gotten some sort of lessons learned from other markets. I'm really curious, what are international regulators and utilities doing to compensate energy storage at the advanced level, and call it advanced services? And how does that differ from, or maybe how is the U.S. market trailing other markets in that approach?
Yeah, I think as a global provider, we see everything from, the brand new market that just wants to do frequency regulation. It feels like every market that ever opens up, that's the first thing they do.
Yeah.
And they all want high capacity 1 hour batteries and move on and on and on.
Right.
And we saw that here as well, right? You saw that in New Jersey as an early example for the frequency regulation markets, ERCOT, California, et cetera. And then now what we see very broadly, we see in Australia and the UK in particular, And actually, we see it coming up in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
They're really getting into complex models, right? Everything needs to be grid forming. They intend to use them as black start devices as needed. They are doing frequency regulation along with day ahead or different time variables for capacity in combination. And more we're seeing other advanced functions. So we have a project in the UK that's public. It's out there for Zenobē that it's doing stability services, right? So virtual inertia, reactive power, all a very wide range of applications that are taking place. And we're seeing that same thing in Australia as well, right? They're moving to those applications. Saudi Arabia is moving to those applications almost immediately. The US has gotten better. Right? We have ERCOT more closely mirrors Australia at this point and the AMO, right? So a more mature participation model for battery energy storage that should eventually give better opportunities to the systems that are out there. California is heading in its own direction, but we haven't yet seen really advanced features.
So you said something that I hadn't heard before, and I want you to help us understand it. I've seen sort of like synthetic transmission, but I'd not heard of. You used virtual inertia, sort of like virtual power plants. And I think I've heard it referred to as synthetic inertia. What does this mean, and how does that actually provide stability speak to the folks who maybe aren't power engineers.
And I'm not a power engineer, so that'll be a whole lot easier.
Well, you had to learn it.
Had to learn it. These are services that are trying to replace the impact of inertia, right? So inertia in a very simple format is everything was reciprocating engines, turbines, things that spun. So if you took away the fuel, right, you ended all of that, you'd continue to get that impact on the generation that would help hold up the grid, help hold up the frequency. This is very similar, but there's no spinning mass on an inverter, so you really have to synthesize that in the way that you're creating waveforms and putting that forward.
Got it. You mentioned your project with Zenobē. I think one that I find really fascinating was the one in the Shetland Islands. How are they using batteries to provide grid reliability?
That's a little bit different.
Is it?
Right? Yeah. So that application there is Shetland Islands have a lot of wind generation.
Right.
So that's more how do you mitigate the loss of the transmission infrastructure? So they have a DC coupled underwater cable. If there's any interruption in that service, there's so much power and energy that is on the island. You need a mechanism using batteries, using other devices to really wind that down, right? How do you take that capacity offline and keep your grid up, or go back to a black start scenario to get it back up and running?
Do we have the necessary components in place now from a technology, policy, software to really make storage deliver the kinds of complex grid services that we've heretofore been told were not possible? Like, storage is backup. It's not the backbone of the grid. And I'm just curious, are we there yet?
I think we are, right? I think the gap to ever more creative ways to use energy storage is rather small. The batteries have become far more reliable. We have system-wide uptime for our entire fleet of 99%. So now batteries are actually getting to the point where they can be seen as a grid asset. I have been in the industry for a while now, and I go back about 10 years, and I remember a number of utilities looking at me and say, batteries are a nice toy, but they're not a grid asset. I think they've actually come to the point where they are a reliable enough asset that the grid operators are looking at them and saying, I'm actually buying this, like I'm buying substations and turbines and everything else that's in place. And that, I think, is both the battery and the maturity on the inverter side. And then all of the control systems, which we put a lot of focus into, have come to that level and are able to serve those purposes. The next horizon is now we have AI data centers that are coming in, and they're creating brand new problems that we can solve, but nobody's actually done it physically yet, right? All works in the power system models. We actually have the solutions. We're working with customers to be able to go at that, but until somebody builds it and believes it, the utilities are going to balk and say, no, I need a transmission wire.
Yeah.
Right?
Where are we seeing utilities internationally put real revenue on these assets, and what can we learn in the U.S. market from that? Or conversely, how are you seeing your customers in the U.S. maybe take advantage of the revenue opportunities and take them to their utility partners and start to request these kinds of, what I'm going to call revenue services, right? Where the battery itself gets more ancillary revenue than just as a backup product.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it also a bit, and I think Dave already mentioned some very good examples in Australia, also with Zenobē, you referred to Shetlands. I think it is good that we can show we can do it. I think every market and every customer, and then you mentioned policies as well, of course, is going in its own pace. I think what you can see is that more renewables coming into the mix, of course, is driving this. That in the end, you then have to have more complex services because you need to be able to provide this inertia, synthetic inertia. But I think there's also an element of what's happening in the outside world.
Yeah.
Like in Spain, there was a power blackout.
Right.
And I think that has really also made people realize that, hey, we need to have a strong enough grid. And the batteries then also become into the equation as well.
Yeah.
So I think climate change and the fact how we deal with that, grids getting older, different assets that make up the energy mix per country, of course, will drive different pace of change in different countries. But I think really in Spain, there's now a lot of call, like we need to invest more in batteries. We need to make sure the grid is stronger.
Yeah.
We need to be able to have this stability because my parents happened to be there and they said you couldn't even pay.
Right.
Nowadays, we don't have cash anymore. So no one could do anything. You couldn't take a train. You couldn't take a bus. We're so dependent on a stable grid.
And increasingly just this digital infrastructure that powers our lives. I appreciate you answering the question that I wanted to ask, which is what are the key drivers in the marketplace that are actually giving us the signals that we can monetize batteries in different ways. We've gone from standalone batteries doing frequency regulation, voltage ride-through, things like that in the islands and New Jersey. Load shifting is probably the most common use in California. Now ERCOT is showing true multi-use participation. I'm curious if you have a perspective on, or what your perspective is on, the mindset shift that you're seeing in developers to really learn to capture the full value of storage, specifically how they're integrating batteries into their proposals, into their plant design, with the forethought that the battery is more than just a backup device.
One of the fundamentals that's behind all this is that energy storage ultimately is seeking revenue from other sources. Right? The grid has always had elements that can provide these services, whether it's from the generation side or they're sort of building up buffer or backup, or they're putting in cap banks here and there. This is nothing that they're not already doing. They're just doing it with a different asset. So that revenue shift from one form to the other is either going to get pushed by regulation or it's going to get pulled by developers that seek it. And we are seeing developers that are going out into the marketplace, looking to negotiate bilaterally with utilities, looking to educate them a lot more on what the particular promise is. And those are the developers that we put a lot of support into. So we've spent a lot of time helping developers put together models and performance and things that they can take to the distribution utilities or the regulators and say, this is a better use for this asset in this location. Yeah. So there's always going to be a balance of, call it an 80-20 rule, right? You'll have 80% of the developers are going to go and say, I just want an offtake. Yeah. Right. And I'm not going to mess with it. And not
going to get sophisticated.
I'm not going to get sophisticated because my capital source doesn't want any of that. Then you'll have 20% of the developers that push the envelope, do bilateral agreements, try and do things that are a little more advanced. We have a project in Georgia. It's actually been there a little while, but it's based on a bilateral agreement that says I'm gonna deliver guaranteed capacity from solar at a certain fixed point in time. Okay. Right. And I'm gonna bid it, and if I'm wrong, I'll take the penalties on top of that.
So you have to hedge that.
So so we see folks that are pushing into those types of scenarios more and more, and it's opening up opportunities to be able to better serve the grid.
Sure. And in ERCOT, all across ERCOT, there are developers taking the merchant risk on these assets. I wonder, as developers and even end customers like data centers push the envelope on what batteries are capable of, what, from your perspective, what's at stake if we don't find the solutions to address the need for, or the opportunity for batteries to step in? What's at stake there?
I think Tamara, hit the nail on the head. Like the grid's going to go down, right? Or we're going to stop development and we're going to shrink the economic power of things like data centers or large scale manufacturing, right? If you can't put load out on the grid, then you stop the economy.
I honestly don't believe that. I think the technology is there. Also together, us working with our suppliers. I think as an industry, we're learning as we're doing. Yeah. And I think we're all the time progressing. And as Dave said, no one has done it now maybe for the complexity for a data center, but we are working on it. We're modeling it. We're making sure that we provide the services. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I think the willingness is there. Yeah. The willingness is there and we're going to get there.
Yeah. I would argue also one thing that's at stake is industry somehow believing that it's not possible and reverting back to spinning reserves and fossil fuels and waiting, or as it has been suggested, bringing in coal plants from other places, right? Because a lot of the power hungry tech platforms need power now, and despite their platitudes for decarbonization, they are more energy hungry than climate conscious, I would say. So I think that it's encouraging for me to hear that battery technology, as well as the software integration, is at the stage where we can reliably believe in it and trust it.
And I think what you say, of course, everyone is energy hungry, so there needs to be energy. And I think you see different parts of the world driving for decarbonization as well. Mm-hmm. And I think we also have to accept that everyone will move at their own pace. Right. But we are moving. Yeah. We're not standing still. Some might move faster than others, some might move slower, but we're moving ahead. And the ones that are in front are actually paving the way with technology, with solutions, with commercial solutions as well for the rest.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you use energy hungry, right? I think we're more energy hungry, but it's a little different. The appetite has changed. That's right. We don't want meat and potatoes anymore. We want to get fancy. Right? Yeah. We want some pasta. We want all kinds of the flavors in that. And that load profile mix is really what's driving the need for energy storage and other technologies to help do things you can't do with a bulk power plant and a fixed transitional grid. Yeah.
Well, I ate a sushi samba last night, and now I want Wagyu steak on a 700-degree stone. That's about as sophisticated as I can upgrade the meat and potatoes analogy. As we close, if I'm a developer or a utility leader sitting here today listening to this conversation, what one thing do you hope that I'm going to take away from this conversation on how I approach integrating storage into my next project?
From my perspective, I think it is, the takeaway I want is work with your technology provider, right? Get into an interactive conversation about how that technology is going to be applied, how you might look at things differently. I know from our end, it winds up becoming very open conversations about the art of possible. Mm-hmm. You can actually find a lot more if you're going at it that way than if you try and decide what you want in a silo and say, here's our RFP. Right. Right. So I think that's an important nature. In particular on the software end, right, on a takeaway standpoint, is we can do more than they may think we can do. Right. Right. So you have to be able to ask the questions and seek some of the outcomes that are there. We've worked with a number of developers where it's, would you like it to be fixed, or would you like performance-based outcomes? Right. Right. In particular on the software side, where we can say, let's work at it so we both have an incentive to make it better.
Yeah. That flexibility is really key.
And I think what Dave mentions is key, partner. I think it shouldn't be the case that a developer comes to, here is my RFQ, please quote the price. I think partner also means trying to understand the art of what's possible. Yeah. What do you need? And kind of work out a solution together. So it's really about partnering. And this is then also, if you say, hey, what would be the alternative? That's not very, you could say it's a bit of a dark alternative.
Yeah.
So if we can partner together and we kind of can help satisfy each other's needs, develop the technology for the future, I think then we don't get to the dark scenario.
Yeah.
We will have your Wagyu steak
That's right.
on the stone.
Indeed. Yesterday, I learned a lot from the conversation with Neha and Ruchi. I hope folks will go listen to it. One of the things that stands out the most for me in particular, having talked to a lot of different folks around battery storage and the way the teams approach that partnership, is just how invested the Wärtsilä team is in understanding the outcomes that your partner is looking for in a bid. So much so that you can qualifiably show that, yes, you can even pay a little more for a product that has certain features you didn't know you needed, because it's going to give you an outcome in the bid that is more beneficial to your customer. I think that level of solution selling has not been available to us in the battery sector until very recently. So my hat's off to the Wärtsilä team and the way that you're approaching it. Thank you for taking the time to come spend time with us. Dave and Tamara both are leading the effort globally for Wärtsilä Energy Storage. Appreciate you taking time to be at the Power Up Lab stage.
Thanks very much for this good talk.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I really appreciate it.